and still, being not an expert, hand me your favorite Warhawk and I will tear them to shreds because it's actually not that hard. He also started as a comedian. Why all of a sudden does this standard only apply to me and only when I'm talking about Israel?
So recently, Dave Smith went on the Joe Rogan podcast, and the two ripped Warhawks for refusing to debate about Israel. And when they're put in the position to do so, commonly being evasive by obsessing over the lack of expertise of their opponent rather than making actual arguments. The two visit some of the best moments from Dave's debate with Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan's show the last time and what it means. So let's get their take. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
The media is so bizarrely compromised. It's so weird when you watch these narratives spin both on the left and on the right. And you're like, is anybody fucking rational? Is anybody looking at in this so few that a comedian like yourself just rises to the top of the heap?
Well, it's funny, dude, because since the last time I was on, this has been kind of like the knock on me in a way now.
Is that you're a comedian?
You're just a comedian.
You're
this
my
guy's not
emotional
an expert.
support comedian.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Have you ever been?
It feels weird.
Have you ever been to the crossings?
Emotional support comedian?
It feels weird doing this without Doug, to be honest. Aww. It seems kind of wrong. But that's been like essentially that's like the knock is like, yeah, but you're acting like you're an expert, but you're just some comedian. And it's like, no, that's the point. That's always been the point. Like, yes, I'm just a comedian. I'm not an expert. And still, being not an expert, hand me your favorite Warhawk and I will tear them to shreds because it's actually not that hard. And like, these people aren't really experts either.
Well, also the problem with that is these people that are talking about these things are talking about people not being experts while they're not experts.
Yeah.
There's, what does Doug have a degree in? English?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Sam Harris is a neuroscientist.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different people who have, expertise in one area that is pretty much outside geopolitical, world politics and international relations and chaos and war and the military-industrial complex. And these are very, very complex, sophisticated, nuanced discussions that you have to have when you're talking about these things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in their worldview, I guess their expertise in that niche subject just overrides anyone else's expertise. This is just an evasion tactic. It's a way to skirt an actual argument. It's a way to evade actually putting arguments on the table, which Douglas Murray basically never did, until something like an hour into that last podcast. And even then, he kept going back to this appeal to authority and complaining about Dave's supposed lack of expertise. But Dave's exactly right. If he can put out the arguments despite his lack of expertise, what does it say to these people that are obsessed with appeals to authority and constantly complaining about lack of expertise? Well, if he did lack expertise, it should be pretty easy to rake him over the proverbial coals when it comes to the debate, right? Well, they never do, and he's exactly right about that.
There's so many different factors at play. There's so much money. There's so much bullshit in terms of what's the truth? What's the narrative? Who's pushing the narrative? Who's being paid to push the narrative? Which is really weird. There's so many of these fucking online influencers that I don't even think are really human beings that have prominent accounts.
Yep. But then there's also, it's a convenient kind of way to dismiss somebody.
Of course, instead of addressing the facts.
Well, I thought it was, I thought was really funny to me was that, so a few days after the last time, after me and Douglas Murray debated on the show, he went on Bill Maher's show. And so it's after having this whole thing, the whole 45 minutes opening the show about how you comedians don't know what you're talking about. He says don't know what you're talking about while he's smearing two people who he's never heard of and doesn't even know what they do or whatever. But not the best way to make an appeal to expertise. But no, he doesn't have a problem with Bill Maher doing it because he agrees with him. So the issue isn't really being an expert versus being a comedian. Konstantin Kassin went on this whole thing about expertise and all of this, and it's he also started as a comedian. Why all of a sudden does this standard only apply to me and only when I'm talking about Israel?
Yeah, this is the Israel first mentality. It's that you can't suffer to endure criticisms of Israel without lashing out about lack of expertise or deferring to a claim that person's anti-Semitic. This is the real mindset of the America First crowd that will double down and evade actual arguments on the substance regarding to Israel. And if you look at who knows the past and the history of Israel, it's people like Dave Smith and Max Blumenthal and Scott Horton. It's not people like Douglas Murray and Konstantin Kisin, despite, what they seem to purport. And they've never showed up in kind to really debate Dave in that way. I will give credit. Actually, Konstantin Kisin did do this for a little bit on Michael Malice's show. He used some of the same tropes, etc., but Douglas Murray certainly didn't. So I'll leave that as an olive branch to Kisin, but what Dave's saying is absolutely correct. These people were comedians, but, Douglas Murray is not going to sit beside Bill Maher and say, hey, we do agree on this Israel thing. We do agree that, Israel has the right to defend itself. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. Hamas are barbarians. The war would end as soon as they give up the hostages, etc. The whole propaganda that we get on that. He didn't just stop Bill Maher and say, but wait, you're a comedian. You don't have the expertise to say that. No, because they agree. He doesn't stop them. So Dave's exactly right.
It never applied to me when I was talking about COVID. It never applied to me when they agreed with me on stuff. Right. They would just go, look, Dave, breaking it down. But now there's this one topic that one guy is not allowed to not be an expert on. And it happens to be this one topic that the entire population is turning on. I shouldn't say the entire, but
it's
huge
super
numbers.
Obvious when someone attacks what you do professionally versus what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
Why not just dispute what he's saying instead of this appeal to authority?
Right.
You're not an expert.
But also, to ask that question is to answer that question.
Right, you can only ask me a few things in life that I can give you definitive answers on.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the Israel factor of this is really at the heart of this whole thing. It's the Israel first mentality, as I mentioned before. These people see the Zionist stranglehold over the political system slipping away gradually. Of course, we're not there yet. AIPAC boasts about how many of our elected representatives they essentially control and have in their wings. And, the most bipartisan thing in Washington is aid to Israel. But at the same time, you see major people, even on the right, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, questioning the Israel mentality for the first time, saying they're America only because they don't want to fund the escapades and the genocide of Israel and Gaza. That's a major thing that's causing desperation in the same way that mainstream liberals were scared to see, of a more free speech centered culture rise. And, we're seeing that being chipped away with over the Israel issue as well. But that is the truth.
And even then, I might have to refer to expert. If you want to ask me about judo, I've been doing jujitsu since 90, I think I started in 97, somewhere around then. 96, maybe. I don't know shit about judo.
Right.
I know how to do a few hip tosses, but when someone is doing something, I don't even know what it's called. If I go haragoshi, I might get it wrong, because haragoshi might be legs on the outside versus leg on the inside. Wrestling, I got to defer to DC. So even in martial arts, I'm not totally an expert.
Yeah, and then there might be somebody who is totally an expert, say a wrestler who went to the Olympics,
right,
and was a total expert, or a coach or something like that, total expert in wrestling, and they could still get something about MMA completely off,
or jiu-jitsu.
Right, because
it happened in the last fight, in the last UFC card. Daniel Cormier didn't know about the dead orchard. So he thought this person was fine because they had two arms in while they're caught in a triangle. I go, no, this is a real submission. This is fucking dangerous. There's this guy, Nathan Orchard, who figured out how to do a triangle with two arms in, and it's replicable. A lot of guys do it now. And I think it was a lady at the last UFC had it. And I was like, oh, shit. And Daniel didn't know it yet. There's a couple other things, like the buggy choke. If you don't know about jiu-jitsu and you see a guy who's on his back and he's getting smothered, but all of a sudden he reaches under with his leg, and I'm going, oh, and you don't know what's going on. That's a fucking choke, a really dangerous one. Ty Ruotolo gets you in that, you're Fucksville. There's guys, so it's there's areas of expertise, even in areas that I'm an expert in, that I have to call on other people. This is a stupid argument.
Yeah, no, this is a fair point. It's a very different field he's talking about here, but honest learning and gaining of new knowledge, and academia and honest scholarship and research in general relies on bouncing ideas off each other. You know, the experts in various fields debate other experts. They talk about, you know, their perspectives on certain things. This happens in the field of history, which is my background, where people debate ideas, ask others for their ideas, ask how their ideas fit into their own ideas, etc., to gain more knowledge. That is an intellectual pursuit, and that intellectual pursuit is far superior than talking endlessly about your own expertise and never producing an argument.
Like, what are the facts? Does that submission work? Is that genocide?
Right.
Like, what is, you know, what's going on? Were you funding Hamas? Is Hezbollah a proxy of Iran? Did Iran get the money to do this when Biden released the funds? Because who's allowed to be an expert on all these things?
Yeah, and then of course there are things like do you support lockdowns? And like, in order to have, say, an expert opinion on this policy, it's like, okay, well, you'd be like, they'd say we're following the science. You know, so in other words, they have an epidemiologist or something like that who's arguing lockdowns will cut down on the transmission of the virus. Forget they turned out to be wrong, but leaving that aside, you're like, okay, but are they also an economist? Are they also a specialist, a sociologist, a specialist in childhood development who would tell you what closing the schools? Oh, who's the person who has expertise in every single one of those fields? Doesn't exist. There isn't an expert in all of those fields.
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is the idea that their expertise in this niche science field just is superlative over all other forms of expertise that might say, hey, the lockdowns were a backward idea. They were tyrannical. They hurt people. They encourage people to take their own lives. They destroyed the entrepreneurial and academic pursuits of people. They forced old ladies and old men to die alone in hospitals because their loved ones couldn't see them. No one has the expertise in all those fields. Dave's exactly right. But this was the line we were given during the COVID regime. Follow the science. That was the narrative. And these specialized science fields, which basically turned out to be wrong when it came to the 6-foot rule and outdoor spread and all sorts of things like that, whether lockdowns were effective, they weren't, regardless in general of which state did that, whether they were more restrictive or not. You can see all the data essentially bears that out. But that is what they went with. And Dave's point stands.
You know what I mean?
That was the problem with that time, because that time everyone was so fearful, and the news was pushing fear, and it was clearly a narrative. I forget who it was, but some health official was being interviewed recently, and he said that during 2020 that Anthony Fauci said to him, the problem is Americans aren't scared enough. Which is crazy to say. It's a wild thing to say, that your goal is to make people more fearful. So you're trying to put out a narrative that makes people more fearful, which, by the way, fucks with your immune system in a gigantic way.
Yeah, I mean, that's the narrative that they use to carry all these policies, that, you know, you're going to be killed or your life is threatened. You won't have security without this new policy we want to roll out. They did the same thing on 9/11, producing the DHS, the THSA, the Patriot Act. We saw it during the COVID regime. We see it time and time again. It requires striking fear into the populace to unfurl these absurd tyrannical schemes.
Not good at all to be scared. I don't know how many people got really, really, really sick from COVID because when they got it, they freaked the fuck out and they couldn't sleep and they thought they were going to die and they were riddled with anxiety. And that makes you attack people around you, and then you look for a solution. And when these trusted institutions, which up until 5 fucking years ago, I was 100% on board with everything, with vaccines, with every medical innovation, other than psychiatric medications, which I think are pretty much overprescribed. All of a sudden, everyone's like hoping these people have the answer. So anybody who's like, but there's this guy Jay Bhattacharya, you know, he's also an expert. No, fuck you, fuck you. It's like an anti-science.
He was the expert that was right. That was the problem with Jay Bhattacharya in those days. He became a pariah for being exactly right and prophetic about how backward the whole culture and COVID cult was about these things.
That's the science, COVID denier, vaccine denier. It just became this fearful because everybody just responded to the fucking media, because everybody's too tuned in to all of this negative shit, man, all day long.
Well, you have to scare people. You know, if you wanna implement like a tyrannical policy, you
have to
almost
scare
always
people.
have to scare people. I
Always.
mean, that's now
It's the only way.
Now, yeah. Now everyone knows, right? Like you just said, like being terrified is not good for your health. That on a human level, we also all know that it's not good for good decision making. You know, but it is excellent for I will turn my brain off and give the authority to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the biggest folly that people have in tumultuous times is just deferring all agency that they would otherwise have to government to solve these issues. If the COVID regime and 9/11 in particular in my lifetime doesn't show what a senseless trajectory and senseless, deferral system that is, I don't know what would. It goes back to what Rahm Emanuel said one time, the famous Illinois politician. He said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." And by that, I mean, it's an opportunity to do things you could not do before. He said this out in public. This was just a masked down moment. But the entire Washington regime acts and operates exactly in that way. They need propaganda to support their wars, their subversions of civil liberties, etc. It's part of the whole game. It's part of the American propaganda system. And Americans aren't immune to it. We saw how many people fall in line over, the Ukraine First movement, Israel First, the Patriot Act. There's so many examples that I could say here. But I think Dave's exactly right. These two were on the right path in terms of what's required to get people to do ludicrous things in the name of public safety and of public health in the case of the COVID regime. But it also got to the heart of what's at the center of this focus on expertise and how, this elite class can be the only ones to argue these points. And if I'm ever presented with someone that is non-elite, non-credentialed, and non-expert, I can just defer merely to my own expertise to just sideswipe any semblance of an actual debate and actual arguments. That's what Douglas Murray did to Dave. That is a lot of what the Israel First crowd has done to Dave when he's been in these situations. Thankfully, he has found himself sometimes on Piers Morgan and other avenues where he does slay the Zionists that try to defend and double down on Israel's atrocities. Same thing when it comes to, zealous supporters of Ukraine. Dave smashes them down. He's consistent on foreign policy, and there's one thing that the regime hates most: principled consistency when it comes to the wars. Because if you start a war, they'll make you president, but if you want to end a war, that is making you persona non grata in Washington, and that's where we're at. But let me know down below, is Dave and Joe correct about debates, the appeals to expertise, and what it takes to strike fear into people so that they give power to government? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Joe Rogan. I really appreciated this interview with Dave. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support my channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.